Well, kids, it's nowhere near around that time of year, but regardless, gather around so I can tell you about horror stories. We've all been that kid who got scared by a horror story at some point in our lives. It may have happened while you were out in the woods and a parent or family member thought it would be funny to frighten you, or you could have been at a friend's house under a blanket fort, and right when he gets to the most suspenseful part, another friend turns off the lights and screams. You may have even been that kid, and you probably thought it was funny too, huh, you little shit? Well, I'd make sure to watch my back when I'm going down the street at night. Anyway, it had the ability to give you nightmares or make you become super paranoid in the dark if it was told well enough or was genuinely frightening. There's a good reason we all scare ourselves shitless, and that's because it's fun. Everyone, whether they like to admit it or not, likes to be a bit spooked every once in a while. That huge rush of adrenaline and realization that it was nothing can be so jarring you can't help but laugh. I mean, we have an entire holiday around trying to scare people. I'm a huge fan of horror as a genre and the many scenarios that can come from it, whether a brutally honest, straightforward slasher or a more artsy look inside someone else's psyche, I'll be there ready to watch it. Unless it's Mother. That movie was a little bit too weird for me, not gonna lie. Naturally, when I found out about the horror story reading community on YouTube, I had to check them out and see what made them so famous and highly recognized. I, unfortunately, found out that it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I was under the impression that since these videos were by YouTubers, they would have some creative editing to recreate the scene of the aforementioned story to really bring it to life for the viewer and engage them on a high level. I guess I just aimed too high in expectations because the horror story reading community could be better interpreted as radio hosts. Some of them made over 30-minute long videos every single day reading interesting stories off creepypasta.org, or in rare cases, they'd read off their own creative literature to see how an audience might react. Still definitely less than I was hoping for, so I decided to make a video explaining why I felt they were a disappointment in terms of content being made and shown on YouTube rather than being sold as a podcast or advertising itself as such. I still really like that video. It's probably one of the best I ever made while I was still using iMovie on my phone, but most of the channels I was talking about were doing what they wanted, how they wanted, in a respectable, easy to sit down and listen to sort of way. The only really good points I made were against a channel I didn't go into as much as I had wanted, as to better look at the entire community as a whole. That guy was Mr. Nightmare, one of, if not the biggest horror story channels on YouTube at the moment, and is still able to regularly get views in the millions, sometimes even appearing on trending despite the serious subject matter. If he's at the top, there must be something special he's doing that's better than all the rest. That was the mindset I had going in for the first time, and when I came back out, well, let's just say I had a lot more to contribute to the video than before. That video was made a little over 1 year ago today, and it marks a special point in this channel's history as the first real year-end celebration I ever did. With it being January, and there being nothing else to do other than watching shitty Blumhouse movies, I thought I might as well take another look at Mr. Nightmare after all this time, and see if he's improved his content in any way. And if he hasn't, that's just one more thing to criticize him for. This is a thorough look into the channel Mr. Nightmare. Roll credits! Oh yeah, I stopped doing those spinny opening cards a while ago. That should be good enough. Mr. Nightmare as a channel started off really simple, making videos containing almost no editing of him talking about various horror stories from across the web, and occasionally putting in a top 10 related to creepy things like what you can find in a crawl space, or a hidden cellar, or the bottom of a weeaboo's basement, and that kind of thing. He didn't seem like anything that special, but no channel starts off as a powerhouse of personality that everyone wants to watch. Looking farther into his content, his videos do get slightly better, improving his microphone, making more frequent editing cuts, but he mostly keeps the same kind of content structure he always did. That leads us to now. Yeah, not much of a story, because there really isn't much to tell in terms of changing much for the better. On occasion, the topics would be more interesting or unique, and he sometimes photoshops images to add more to the story, but he hasn't improved much at all since I last reviewed some of his content over a year ago. His issues have stayed the same and exacerbated in some areas, so I'm just gonna talk about all of them, starting with his voice. Listen to my voice. I and most other content creators try and do this thing with our voices, something everyone has the ability to, but seems to lose it whenever they're nervous or can't read a script. That little factor that gives us that extra engagement factor is called emotion. We say how we feel about a topic, or portray ourselves in skits like we normally would in conversation, but then we take that, try and be more coherent and exaggerative, and then you've got a voice that's not only explaining something in monotonous detail, but a voice that engages you as a viewer personally to try and feel an entertain. I say this because Mr. Nightmare suffers from a lack of ability to show intense emotion. His voice is fine, it doesn't sound bored or unconfident, but he doesn't try to engage the viewer deeper than slightly frightened, slightly shocked. Oh my god, there's a man inside my house. He is so scary, I could just die. Compared to if I said it with some more passion, such as this. Oh my god, there's some guy in my house, I don't know him. It's really frightening. I could just die. Okay, not like that, not as overacted as that, but you get the picture. You feel completely different than if a guy just said that like he was reading from a script. Whether you like it or not, how the story is told is just as important as the story itself, and while talking with little emotion as if you're some grim storyteller reading a book they know well, it doesn't exactly get the bones tingling like some good old-fashioned voice acting can. The other audio measures, those being music and sound effects, play an important part in how you react as well. Any jackass off the street can pull an old Michael Jackson's Ghost video. For all the kiddies watching, don't. I make content for viewers 13 and up, but anyway, the old Michael Jackson's Ghost video was popular reaction material back in the earlier days of YouTube because it would sure make you react alright. It was a normal video up until the end, where a scream sound can be heard and Thriller starts playing loudly. That kind of scare is the momentary, and usually ineffective in the long run, jump scare. I'm unsure if jump scares are a concept anyone tolerates, let alone finds entertaining, but you bet your ass every low-budget horror director with no creativity has used the jump scare in spades even when it was completely unneeded. The jump scare is a lazy move that places its use in the senses of a person suddenly being disrupted with an unexpected sound or pop up from nowhere to give you a momentary seizure, and Mr. Nightmare couldn't even do them right. The way he would do it would be he'd start lowering the music when something was beginning to get suspenseful. Oh my god, what's gonna happen? Is there gonna be a jump scare? Then he'd do it, and it wouldn't have as much of an effect since you could see it coming from a mile away. Another problem he had, and still does now, is with his music choices. On holiday-themed videos, he tends to shake it up with what music plays in the background, but most of the time, it's the most generic, unremarkable horror music you've ever heard. For years, whenever something disturbing or worth pointing out as weird was mentioned, he'd play this sharp violin that could get really annoying, like oh my god, oh lord, something's coming, something is going to be explained as disturbing, I wonder what. Thankfully, he's slightly changed his music in the past 6 months or so, but jump scares are still abundant, unnecessary to the overall story, and make the whole thing feel more like a scripted thing, when these are supposed to be true stories. That brings me to my next point, the bit about everything being true stories. When someone tells you a story about a time back when they were a kid and they had a break-in experience, you automatically believe them because that's a story that's easy to believe and can happen to anyone under the right circumstances. If you were to say, tell a story about working at Toys R Us and finding some guy in a costume who just kind of freaked you out, left, and didn't show up on security, or something about being chased by a killer clown in the woods, that could be seen as a bit more unbelievable. You still trust them being their friend, but this abscess of doubt starts to form in the back of your head. You know the good old meme, Pixar didn't happen? Well, in this scenario, taking a picture would be pretty normal as a response when you're a good distance away. This is the 21st century after all, where everyone has a phone with a camera attached to it they could easily use for evidence. Now, am I saying that all Mr. Nightmare's claim to be true videos are false and shouldn't be trusted? Not exactly. Most of the stories are in the realm of possibility and don't seem too far-fetched to suspend your disbelief at, but every once in a while I just gotta question, really? That actually happened to you? Because I feel like I heard that exact same story in some crappy horror movie from like 10 years ago. I wouldn't care as much if it weren't for the fact he always puts 3 true stories that took place while babysitting, 27 true occurrences of alien abduction. Ooh, spooky. I get that it would take a lot to prove some of the stories he presents because they're hard to provide proof for without revealing too much personal info, but he could just put like, allegedly true stories, then I'd be fine. It's understandable you want to put true stories into your title for views, but the truth is, unless you can prove them yourself, then you've just got another possibly made-up tale. It's not like it's a really hard concept to grasp, faking stories to get on a popular YouTube channel and gain plenty of recognition/sympathy from viewers. It ain't like the stories are hard to come up with. Would I say it's easy to make up a break-in story, how you were playing hide-and-seek and saw someone come by you, thinking it was your friend, then you see it's some old guy and run to your neighbor's house or your dad? Yep, pretty much. It's easy to see yourself in, easy to believe, and no one will question you out of fear of being insensitive. It's honestly honestly a perfect plan. Maybe I could even forgive the title if the stories were interesting. Unfortunately, they aren't. Every story has the most generic outcome because you know it's a horror story and you know how that kind of situation set up is going to go. Obviously, the person didn't die since they lived to tell the tale of how this happened, so the actual stakes can't be as high since you know they end up okay. For example, if you were telling a story about being lost or in bad weather and seeking shelter in a cabin, the guy is either gonna try and kill you in your sleep, or you think he's being creepy, go to authorities or something, and they say, I'm sorry, son, no one's lived in that house for years. Dun dun dun! How unexpected. Only the most overused cliche for a horror movie possible. That's another thing about true stories. They have the same kind of outcome if the storyteller isn't dead. In the realm of fiction, no turn or twist is too weird or shocking for a creepypasta, but in the world of reality, options are pretty limited. Home Alone stories, I'll take most if not all of them, will involve someone trying to and or breaking into a house for 500, Jim. Christmas stories, bet most will have something to do with someone dressing up as Santa Claus to rob people and trick children. Online dating. Could it be that the person isn't who they say they are, or they're crazy? It could just be the specific topic he goes for, but Mr. Nightmare videos are pretty easy to predict, and I've been able to correctly guess most of the time. I do like some of his more general scary story videos, because Mr. Nightmare is given the room to pick stories that wouldn't normally fit into his regular category, so he chooses more creative ones that are at least somewhat more mysterious in outcome. He may decide to put dumb sound effects in that lessen the story, as opposed to just letting it speak for itself, but what are you gonna do? Change it? Nah, instead let's just pump out the same kind of video like 5 times, despite them all being somewhat similar in the kind of story being told. It would be nice to have more variety, but I guess he just likes making social media videos because of really artistic reasons. Another complaint I have about the whole true stories gimmick in general is that even when they are true, they're short. You ever wonder why Mr. Nightmare tries to put 3 or 5 stories into single videos that go from 14 to 20 minutes at most? It's because the story doesn't take too long to tell. When it comes to real stories of creepy happenings, you aren't going to go into much detail about your personality or what you're like unless it's integral to the story. Even if you did put a lot of personality into your words, Mr. Nightmare probably wouldn't convey them. When it has less details, a true story is much easier to see yourself in and make you kind of scared solely based on you having the possibility to be in that exact same situation. Then, when you make it out, you feel relief because it's like you made it out. You know Bella Swan, a character so boring I had to Google their name, in the Twilight movies, and how they were a blank piece of wood insecure teenage girls could imprint themselves on and feel like 2 boys were fighting over them? It's the same kind of effect with this, just slightly more subliminal. Creepypastas, in my opinion, have much more room to be creative and entertaining because those stories are made to create characters, set up motivations, and tell a narrative to people like you would in any other fictional story. The length can be really short or incredibly long, depending on if the work is worth dragging out for a long time to establish a world inside of this creepy story, or it could just be some short tale about some random thing that happened in the true stories videos type of style. The difference between the two being that in fiction, options are limitless as to what might transpire, how people can act, and what different endings could be. That doesn't mean that story can't be rooted in reality. In fact, that can be the point. I haven't listened to much of Mr. Creepypasta, but he has great voice actors that are very good at showing emotion. One of the videos I've listened to of his was called I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life. The story that was told felt so realistic, and yet, as it went on, you could tell it wasn't a real story, but you could have known that from the start. It was still very interesting to listen to. Something I couldn't say about the 20th Mr. Nightmare video I watched, because I always knew the general outline for the ending, and I knew nothing of interest would happen with the visuals. I dislike repeating myself, but I could be more forgiving if his visuals improved over time to the point where he could show a story in a way that's creepy and professional looking, but he's barely changed it in the past few years. I mentioned before in the other video that horror storytelling channels didn't have visuals other than a still image or repeated stock footage so that the listener could focus more on the story and what was being said. I can't say the same for Mr. Nightmare because he tries to add something more to his videos to actually have it be, well, a video. The problem with that being that he inadvertently opens himself to criticism by not making the imagery that high quality. His editing consists of moving images, sudden image transitions when it's easy for a jump scare, occasionally adding a backdrop of snow or something for a themed video, and photoshopped images. There isn't anything particularly wrong with the Photoshop, but he doesn't really incorporate it in a way that would work great for a video, so the image just sort of sits there being a Photoshop
photoshopped image. His visual presentation just isn't great, and with an upload schedule of video almost every 2 weeks, you have to wonder what he does with all that time and money he gets from it. He could use some of it to upgrade his video quality, maybe hire an editor or additional voices to help make the stories pop more. That's just a thought if he doesn't want to do it himself. Overall, I see a channel that has the potential to become better if it tries, but seems to just be comfortable doing the same average content they've been making for a long period. At the moment, I don't see many aspects of Mr. Nightmare that make him more worth watching than other horror story channels that are either more confident in their vocal delivery or just have better stories that are more engaging. Mr. Nightmare can change and maybe reach new heights with the added push of effort, but he probably won't even see this video. I've been just up, and all I have to say is, God, his banner annoys me. The mayor in Nightmare is off to the side, and it's so distracting and weird looking. Just add it to the regular text and it would look fine, Mr. Knight. Alright, back to bed I go. I'm sleeping now. Bye.